Welcome to the Beats WonderCon 2023 coverage, sponsored by Bad Idea Comics. So it should be obvious by the title alone that this is obviously a Lovecraft-inspired story. Curious, which of you have actually read Lovecraft, and any particular favorite stories?
Oh, yeah, Herbert West Reanimator is by far my favorite. I don't know if you guys agree or how much you've read, but also The Curious Case of Charles Dexter Ward is really cool. If you haven't read it, it's awesome. And we try to imbue the script with a lot of the Lovecraftian sort of notions and stuff. But obviously, there's so much to pull from. But those would be my two favorites. I don't want to just.
No. You're going to have to take the front of this because I haven't read any Lovecraft, to be honest. A long time ago, I played Call of Cthulhu,
that counts.
The pen and paper game when I was in high school, I've seen movies of it, but I haven't actually,
it's a
read
really
his
tricky.
writing, so we leaned on.
It's really tricky to translate to film, I think. We found that out, but I think there's a lot, even the H.P. Lovecraft movies, I think Reanimator does a great job, but it's like they just use, and there's From Beyond and there's Dagon, and they use the original book as like a springboard, really. It's not just like a one-to-one adaptation, and I think that's what we were coming up against too, just getting a lot of that feeling and imbuing the script and the movie and the animation with a lot of like the Lovecraftian feel.
Yeah, because it is obviously Batman and Gotham and all that kind of stuff. So,
and Batman takes itself. You have Arkham Asylum, which is, it's ripping a name from. It's not ripping. It's borrowing a name from Lovecraftian lore. So there's a lot of Batman is kind of embedded in a lot of the Lovecraftian sort of mythos in a way, in the field, stuff like that.
So someone really recently pointed out to me that if you consider what was happening in the world, in the country during Lovecraft's time, it makes a lot of sense why, his work is so dark. And with what's been happening in the world right now, it seems his stuff really tapped into our current fears and anxieties. I'm curious if that's something working in the film resonated with you with that regard.
Yes. The thing about the Cthulhu stuff is it's in regards to present day trials and tribulations. There's that ugliness of man, and then there's the ugliness of the ugly.
Yeah,
which is kind of the thing about the Lovecraftian stuff that I think that's the thing that directorially I was trying to tap into, which was how do you come up with visually showing doom and having it descend and spread in Gotham, a city that's very doomed already without the doom, without the sort of Lovecraftian Cthulhu-ish influences or bad vibes or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it was interesting to see those play on our current situations, especially with us working on it during the pandemic. It made for interesting, creative choices.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, you got to, when you're talking about, you got to sort of table aside. There's the aberrant racism of Lovecraft. So that aside, just sort of putting that. But what I think a lot of his books have in common is a sense of existential dread. There's something coming to get you, and you don't know when it's going to come. And I know that I don't know about you guys, but I felt that during the pandemic. We're in our houses, something's going to happen. There's an election coming up, something's going to happen. So that those were all happening while we were sort of developing it, and that's something that I tapped into, that feeling of existential dread, which you don't know what scary is coming, but something scary is coming. And the last couple of years were kind of scary, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was a point when we were building it where I was just like, wow, I wonder if this is the right thing to be working on at this point.
Right.
Because it's not a feel-good movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't feel very
Exactly.
good right now. It's for what I know of, Lovecraftian sort of stories, and it seems like in most of these movies, right, it's just everybody dies, right?
Yeah.
You just, there's no hope in it. It's just nihilistic or nihilistic, is that the right term for it? It's this uncaring, there's nothing to really understand about it, right? It's like you look at it, you go insane because you just can't, your brain can't comprehend it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's despair, right?
Yeah.
Because you start from square one, knowing you're going to lose, and it's like a lot of horror films are about, oh my gosh, I hope this person escapes from the monster. How are they going to escape from the monster? And with this story and similar stories, sort of the weird horror genre, like it's how's the bad guy going to get him? We know the bad guy's going to get him, but how? And that's, to me, is something that we try to keep in mind when we were working on this, for sure.
Yeah, and this is kind of going off of, away from your question, but it's like one of the things that I think we leaned upon, because again, it's just like, it's this inevitable, uncaring, unsympathetic doom that's coming, right? So we really tried to play, I think, the human elements of, Batman, Bruce Wayne, the people around them. What do you do against it? How do you sort of, what becomes of you? And I think ultimately that's kind of what it's about, right? What do you do in it? Something that's unrelenting.
There are so many great Easter eggs that were even from the original comic. My favorite, perhaps, is the Herbert West cameo. I have
Mine
to.
too.
I'm really surprised. It's funny also because you have Jeffrey Combs in the film. I'm really surprised. I believe David Dastmalchian does the voice of Herbert West. Definitely not Jeffrey Combs, but I'm just going to say I'm surprised you guys didn't either A, use Jeffrey Combs or model him after it. I'm curious if you were tempted to at all.
I think you'd have to worry about legal
yes.
at that point. Yeah.
I remember we were talking about this, right?
Yeah.
There's like a legal thing.
Yeah. I was just happy that Jeffrey Combs was part of it because I'm such a
I think it's mainly this guy too. Like,
yeah, it was me. I was like, can we please just get him? Thank you,
Yeah.
Sam. I was like, can we just
We're
make
lucky.
Jase happy,
We're lucky.
please? Yeah. No, he's awesome, and he killed it.
Yeah.
Adaptations are very tricky. I know DC Animation has done a lot of these. My personal favorite, or the gold standard for me, is All-Star Superman. Sam, you directed that. Also,
Reported on it too.
Great sport, great, and also a fantastic script by late Ray McDuffie. Obviously that one had to cut out a lot of stuff, but I think it distilled the essence and at the same time added new stuff, like the ending as well with the Lex Luthor. I thought that was just brilliant. You guys also mixed some tweaks, which also I think really actually improved the story in some regard. I'm curious, as writers and directors, how you approach adaptations.
Well, I think it starts when we were developing this with Jim Krieg and Sam and I had the first earlier discussions. It's graphic novel is a different medium, obviously, than a feature, and it's a different kind of story than a feature thing. So it really was going back to what Sam was saying, was like finding that nut of the character, and it was, for me, it was finding Bruce Wayne where he is at point A and where he is at point B. Right, and just sort of drawing that line. It's like, okay, how do we? Because he's the Batman obviously goes through an incredible transformation, right? It's not the same Batman at the end. So, like, what are the steps that we have to take to get him there? And I think if you keep the spirit of that, and I think that's the key to adaptation. The details will change; they'll have to change, right? But I think if you keep the spirit of the character and what the character is going through, you're honoring the original text or book.
Yeah, and I think to add on to it, also, it's very different than books, right? And in this case, obviously, comic books, in particular in this case. I think with books and series work, which I think books are closer to, you can do chapters. You can do sort of self-contained things and still move on and not lose the thread of the narrative thread, right? I think in a continual movie, it's much more difficult because you have to sort of pick a path to go. And unfortunately, because it's a book to a movie, especially like All-Star Superman, which they're wildly different, right? The whole Bizarro kind of thing, like how do you fit that into a narrative without that's just its own chapter, and it has nothing really to do to connect to the rest of it, and if like All-Star Superman was broken down into 5 acts, I just remember thinking like, well, 1 and 2 are kind of clunky, but I think it starts finding its legs in 3 to 5, and so Yeah, it's a really difficult thing to do because, again, like, fans that are really into the source material are going to want everything, but sometimes it doesn't work, in a movie thread kind of a thing, right? Because in this also, right, arguably we put too much stuff into it. Maybe we should have cut out more things because there's so much in it. It's really difficult,
sure.
right? And we hoped there were certain things we did cut out, but again, working on these kind of things, like you try to keep as much as you can, but there's a certain point where the narrative starts becoming too disjointed.
It was an embarrassment of riches, really, because that original book has so much in it. And not only that, and we were just talking about this, what was also tricky about it is it was true to sort of Lovecraft. I know we keep doing Lovecraft, but McNeil's original book was so close to Lovecraft in that it was very ornate and a winding and complex plot in the background. It would be difficult to pull any specific plot without completely unraveling it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that was also something that we had gone back and forth over in developing.
Yeah, I think once like Chris and I started working on the storyboards and stuff like that, it became very apparent that some of the narrative was getting kind of muddy, right? It's like you want a main thread, right, which is Batman, right, because this is about his journey. It's like he would take a step in a direction, and then a flashback would come up, right? He'd come out of the flashback, he takes another step, and then another flashback would come up, and at a certain point, I'm just like, wow, we're kind of losing the sense of where's Batman going? What's he? Because there's too many things that kind of go in the way. So, anyways, things like that, this is starting to get too technical, which I'm sure most people don't care about, but
there's an edit button, right?
But I think that's the problem that you sort of run into, with something that's so rich and so. I mean, I wish this could have been a series in a way. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a whole thing that we, this is something that we explored, even when we were writing it, right? Like the whole thing of like, what is the myth of bats throughout cultures and stuff like that. Right?
We had to cut a lot of that out. You came
with
some great stuff.
We had to cut it out because we were trying to tie the bats into basically being actually their protectors, right? Against the insanity. And that's what Batman, that's the starting.
No, it's cool. It's
spoilery things. But I would have loved to, again, if it was a series, like I think we could have just been like, okay, here's the narrative, whatever, and then we have this one episode basically of kind of like exploring sort of, what are the different interpretations through cultures, different civilizations, historical, mythological, obviously. What does that mean to people, and how does that tie into basically the Batman mythos?
Yeah, I think we were talking to Taimur before. Like, it's such a rich world, and they seem to go. Like you said, they go together so well. So, like, I know, like with Oliver and Kylie's character, I would have loved to see more with them.
Yeah.
And I mean, just the DC universe in here as well would be so awesome.
Yeah. The other thing is Dent for me, because I think Dent was supposed to be more of a pivotal, thing of he's the change, he's the thing that
he's the catalyst,
right, the targets, right? But again, it's such a nebulous thing to sort of like, and you need time for that, right? Even on top of all that stuff, right? It's just like, how do you make a horror film, right? How do you use horror tropes, right? A lot of it's sound design, tension, time, and things like that. But again, there was so much in it, we just had to sort of get through it that we didn't even get to play with that as much as I would have loved to have done.
Yeah, it's a great problem.
Yeah,
it's a great problem to have. It's not like, we were sitting there vamping. Well, like, what are we going to put in the third act here? So there's plenty of stuff. Like, what don't we put in?
Yeah, we definitely cut out a lot of stuff that we would have loved to explore.
I guess finally, as you mentioned, Lovecraft doesn't do happy endings. This, I wouldn't call it entirely pessimistic, but I wouldn't call it entirely happy. How would you view the film's ending?
I never actually saw the film. No, I'm kidding. I would say it's Steph. I'll let you guys go ahead, Christopher.
Oh gosh,
let's put you on the spot. But
I
you
know.
can bump it to me if you want.
Yeah, the ending is. I really like the ending, and at the same time, it makes me angry because of what happens, and no spoilers. Because we had to, there's an ending to the story that continues. It's mostly because of, man. Am I allowed to talk about the ending of the movie?
I think so. I hope so.
Spoilers are okay?
I know.
It will come out Tuesday, so yeah.
Is this live?
It's because of what happens to Bruce. Just he no longer is Bruce. He's other at that point. And it was very, to me, it was just in the movie itself. It becomes, and if you're a fan of Batman, it turns into something that's disturbing. And it's like, oh, I mean, if you're like, you want more, and then you have to deal with him being not Bruce anymore. He's now this other thing.
Oh, I just think, it's yes, it has that just ending that's absolutely full of despair, but in the sense, Gotham actually, I don't know what is the exact quote, but Gotham does get the hero it needs, not the, you know what I mean, not the ones that want it, but in a sick, twisted way, it gets its hero, gets its Batman.
I think this is definitely very un-Lovecraftian as far as I know, that there is, even though it's dark, there's a hope to it, right? But to me, again, it's I was a fan of like Gothic literature when I was, especially when I was younger, right? And the ending and the element is kind of what sold me in a way. There's such a huge sacrifice, that he makes, and I think we made it a little bit more proactive in this for him as a decision. And just conceptually, being the monster in the bell tower, I don't know, it's just, like, I love that concept. It's kind of like, you were such a prominent person in society, and you've sacrificed everything, and now you're the creature in the tower, I don't know, there's just something really evocative about that, that really does it for my teenage college self. So
it's a feel-good ending.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Love this film.
Yeah.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Bad Idea Comics.